Our Violent Ends, Chapter 19. News of a monster attack arrived in Shanghai far before their rival darlings did. Already, regardless that the casualties had occurred out in the countryside, the people of Shanghai were boarding up their windows and locking their doors, finding quarantine to be a better solution than risking madness on the streets. Perhaps they feared the monster who was said to have crashed out the moving train windows and rolled upon the hillsides. Perhaps they feared it would soon stumble into city limits, spreading infection. Benedict threw half of his sandwich into the trash, strolling over the flapping shop banners. Again and again, no matter how many times the White Flower said it, no one cared to listen. These monsters were not random hits. So long as the White Flowers behaved, so long as they continued fulfilling demands. It had been a while since the last demand came. Benedict stopped. He turned over his shoulder. It felt like he was being watched, from both above and below. Eyes on the rooftops and eyes in the alleys. It wasn't his imagination. Quickly he spotted a boy on his tail, lingering at the mouth of an alley. When Benedict locked gazes with him, the boy hurried out, stopping 2 paces away. He was a whole head shorter than Benedict, but they looked the same age. There was a white rag tied to his ankle, half covered by his tattered trousers. A White Flower, then, but not an important one. A messenger, most likely, if he was chasing after Benedict. "I'm looking for Roman Nikolovich," the messenger huffed in Russian. "Is he nowhere to be seen?" "You decided to tail me for Roma?" Benedict replied, his eyes narrowing. The boy folded his arms. "Well, do you know where he is?" Benedict's eyes only narrowed further. "He's not here." All the lower-tiered White Flowers should have known that. It was not difficult to keep attuned to the important members of the gang. It was the messenger's job to keep track of where one was most likely to be in order to find them. And who still called Roma Roman? Suddenly, Benedict's hand snagged out and grabbed the messenger's wrist. "Who really sent you?" The messenger's jaw dropped. He tried to tug away. "What do you mean?" In one smooth motion, Benedict twisted the boy's arm behind his back, then pulled forth a pocket knife that pressed the blade to his neck. It was nowhere near any major artery to act a threat, but the messenger froze, eyeing the blade. "You're a Scarlet," Benedict guessed. "Who sent you?" The messenger remained quiet. Benedict pressed his knife in, cutting the first layer of skin. "Lord Kai," the messenger spat quickly. "Lord Kai sent me because we know that the White Flowers are behind the blackmail demands." Benedict blinked rapidly. "We are not," he said, confused. "Where did you hear such information from?" "It is too late now," the messenger tried to writhe about. "Lord Kai wanted confirmation and confession, but Tyler will have you answer for your insolence. You dare threaten the Scarlet Gang, you pay with blood and fire." Just as Benedict was about to let go of his hold on the Scarlet messenger's arm, the Scarlet twisted his head and bit down hard on Benedict's hand. Benedict hissed, dropping his knife, and the boy bolted, disappearing down the street in record speed. Hardly any of the onlookers by the food stalls even blinked. Something was wrong. Benedict rushed for headquarters, his heart pounding in his ears. By the time he was nearing the residential block, he could hardly hear the yelling. When he tried to push through the front door, he was almost pushed right out. Hey, cut it out!" he snapped, fighting through the crowd. At the center of the living room, the same White Flower who had asked Benedict to help assemble the wardrobe was clutching a slip of paper in his hands. His face practically red as he explained its contents. Benedict caught bits and pieces of the strangled closer. "Bank statement. Our last payment. Exact number. Scarlet account. It's them." "Order!" Benedict roared. The room became still. Benedict was almost surprised. He had never commanded attention like this before. It was always Marshall jumping on the tables or Roma snapping one directive that swept the room like ice. But now, neither Marshall nor Roma were here. Benedict was the only one left. "Give me that," he snapped, holding his hand out for the paper. "What are we crowing over?" "It was sent to us, Mr. Montagov," a voice within the crowd answered. "Proof that we have no blackmailer, and it has been the Scarlets all along." So why did the Scarlet messenger say the exact opposite? "Don't move a muscle," Benedict said without looking up, stopping the group near the door in their tracks. They'd been on their way out, guns at the ready to find Scarlets to fight. With Benedict's instruction, they were forced to look as he turned the paper around, tapping the top corner. The account is registered to Lord Kai, one insisted, even as he squinted where Benedict was pointing. The deposit amount matches the last demand we paid. It's not real, Benedict interrupted. I want the Scarlets dead too, but don't be foolish. No bank crest in the city looks like this. It's not even a good inking. He tossed the paper to the table, flicking his hands for the men to disperse. It is the blackmailer once again. The Scarlets got the same falsified document blaming us. Now get back to your jobs. Benedict? The summons came from above. Benedict's head snapped up, as did everybody else's in the living room, to find his uncle atop the staircase. Lord Montagov's hands were crowded with silver when he set them on the handrails, rings that glinted by the light of the sunset streaming through the windows. Did you say, Lord Montagov said slowly, coming down the steps, taking one at a time like he had to weight himself on each landing first, that the Scarlet Gang received the same information? Benedict could feel sweat starting at the back of his neck. I was accosted by one of their messengers on the streets, he said carefully. He accused us of sending the threats. And still, Lord Montagov came down the last few steps, the nearest men parting to make way for him, a path clearing toward Benedict like some miniature Red Sea. Knowing their malicious intent, you stopped from our own rushing out? An abrupt scraping sound came from the wall outside, like someone had slipped off and fallen to the ground. Before Benedict could entertain the possibility of an eavesdropper outside, a white flower messenger, a true one this time, scrambled through the door, heaving for breath. Come quickly, he gasped. Lord Kai is launching an attack. I will find the Frenchman, Roma said when the train pulled into Shanghai, the station coming into view. And as soon as I find him, perhaps he will be afraid enough to tell us directly who turned him into a monster. Juliet nodded absently, her eyes watching the window pinned on the approaching platform. The sky was horribly dark, but the hour was also growing late. They had spent longer in Susang than Juliet had liked, and the car ride back to Kanshan had been slowed by the potholes on the gravelly roads. It will not be that easy, Juliet grumbled. None of the blackmailers sent him right after us. He did not even bother hiding his face. He turned away from the window and looked at Roma. But still, it is better than nothing. We work from there. Roma rose and reached out to gather his coat from the overhead storage. Before Juliet could stop him, she had hers too, tossing it upon her. Careful, she chided. She stuck her hand into the pocket, checking on the vial they had stolen from Mr. Huai. It was fine, the blue liquid sloshing in its half-filled point. She had a sneaking suspicion that Roma had intended for her to worry that he was going to damage it. He was not foolish enough to forget it was in her pocket, especially not when he had the other half of the vaccine in his pocket, separated into its own vial. We have arrived at the destination, a compartment speaker announced as Juliet got to her feet. The train came to a screeching stop, but even as the noise faded, there was still a dull roar coming from the misty grayness outside, and Juliet peered through the window again, searching for the source. Do you hear that? She said. She didn't give Roma any time to respond. Juliet was already hurrying off the train, watching her step over the platform gap and surging into the crowds, jostling at the station. This wasn't right. There were too many people here. Why were there so many people? Juliet! Roma called. His voice was almost immediately drowned out, and when Juliet glanced back momentarily, she had already lost sight of him. A sharp police whistle sounded to her right. Juliet whipped her attention to the officer, who had one foot balanced on the base of a column while the rest of him clung to it, putting him a few feet above the masses. He was waving at people to move off the platform and onto the station, but only because droves of people were hurrying from outside. Juliet grabbed the nearest person. An elderly woman stared up at her with wide eyes, lips tightening in recognition. What's going on? Juliet demanded. Where are all these people coming from? The woman's gaze darted to the side. In her hand she was holding today's papers, crumpled under her tight grip. Smoke outside, she managed. A gangster's safe house is on fire. Coldness swept down Juliet's spine like a lightning strike. Marshall. She let go of the woman so fast as they had both stumbled, but then Juliet was moving. Her pulse pounded in her chest as she shoved her way through the station. Maybe it was only a small fire. Maybe it was already well controlled. With a gasp, Juliet emerged outside, right onto Boundary Road. aptly named given that the Shanghai North Railway Station sat at the very border of the international settlement. Juliet needed only to look up, observing the state of the skies above the international settlement. The sun was to set within the hour, so there was yet enough light to show great big plumes of smoke driving those on the streets toward whatever shelter they could find. "No, no, no!" Juliet mumbled under her breath, throwing her arm over her nose and breaking into a run. She locked her watering eyes on the plumes, driving forward even as civilians fled to the other direction. Once or twice she heard sirens in the distance, but the sounds were far enough that Juliet knew she would get to the scene first. Then a terrifying scream echoed into the air, a sharp and unusual piercing that sounded rather neither human nor animal. She stopped right in her tracks, waving the smoke out of her eyes. The safe house, where she had put Marshall, was much further ahead, but the screaming was coming from the next street over, which meant, "Oh, thank God!" Juliet cried. It wasn't hers. It wasn't her safe house. But then, what was burning? Juliet ran the rest of the distance, cutting through the dark alley. She found herself coming into a wide road, joining the crowd that was gathered before the spectacle. The people here had not run as those further away had. They were enraptured by the horrific scene, just as someone experiencing the end of the world would stop and stare. "I have never before seen such a sight," the old man beside her croaked. "It is the work of the blood feud," his companion replied. "Perhaps they are getting their last hits in before the nationalists arrive." Juliet pressed her knuckles into her lips. The smoke plumes flowed from a building entirely swathed in flames, and landing around it, like soldiers guarding an enemy outside, were Tyler and the flock of scarlet men. Tyler was laughing. She was too far away to hear what he was saying, but she could see him, holding a plank of wood swirling with flames. Behind him, the building's roaring inferno drowned out the screams, drowned out the whole occupancy burning to death. Juliet heard nothing save that they were pleading. Women in nightgowns and elderly banging on the closed windows. Muffled Russian crying to stop, please stop. On the third-floor window, there was a little hand reaching through the hole in the glass. Seconds later, a small face appeared, hollow and ghastly and tear-streaked. And before anyone could do a thing about it, the hand and the child dropped out of view, succumbing to the smoke. The screams had sounded so strange from the railway station, almost animal, because they had come from children. Juliet fell to her knees, a sob building against her throat. There was a shout from behind her, clear Russian rather than muffled. Whiteflower forces arriving for a fight. She couldn't find it within herself to run. She'd be killed if she lingered here, pathetic and brittle on the side of the road. But what did it matter when this whole city was so broken? They deserved to die. They all deserved to die. Juliet choked on her sudden gasp, caught by surprise when a pair of hands closed around her arms. She almost started to struggle before realizing it was only Marshall Seho yanking her into the nearest alleyway, a cloth covering the lower half of his face. As soon as they were in the alley, Marshall ripped off the cloth and raised a finger to shush her, the two of them keeping quiet as a group of white flowers moved past the mouth of an alley. Roma was among the group, his face aghast. Seconds later, Benedict ran up from the other direction, giving Roma's chest a hard shove as he began to yell. Roma. Oh, God, what was he going to think? Juliet had run off without explanation. Would he expect that she had a hand in this? Would he think that their trip to Kinshan had been a ploy, an attempt to get him out of the city so the Scarlets could launch their attack? In his shoes, Juliet would jump to the exact same conclusions. She should have been pleased. Wasn't this exactly what she desired? For him to hate her so violently that he wanted nothing to do with her? Instead, she only burst into tears. "What has Tyler done?" Juliet rasped. "Who approved this? My father? When has the blood feud ever involved innocent children?" "This isn't just the blood feud," Marshall said softly. He grimaced, then wiped at Juliet's tears. She was letting them run. More and more gangsters on both sides were arriving, and by the sudden gunshot sounds, Juliet guessed a fight to be breaking out. The blackmailer tricked both gangs. Your Scarlets think the Whiteflowers are the ones making the demands. They hurried to get the upper hand, desperate to show that they were too strong to be messed with. Tyler led the attack. Juliet dug her nails into her palms. Her skin throbbed with pain, but it didn't make her feel any better. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I'm sorry his heart is so wicked." Marshall frowned. He was trying to hold back his look of distress, but Juliet still saw it in the speed in which he tried to clear her tears. Once she might have protested, might have feared the weakness she was showing. Now she did not want to pretend that she felt nothing. She would welcome the world's pity if it meant she could just stop hurting. "The wickedest part isn't his heart," Marshall said. He glanced at the end of the alley, jumping ever so slightly when a spray of gunfire came near. "It is that he is truly acting on Scarlet interests, dear Juliet. The wickedness part is that this city is so deeply divided as to allow such an atrocity." Juliet breathed in deeply, steadying herself. Indeed, it always came back to the blood feud. It always came back to the hatred that ran through the very veins of this city, not their hearts. "What are you doing here?" Juliet asked now, scrubbing the last of the wetness from her face. "I told you to stay inside." "If I hadn't come out, you would be over there getting shot by Roma," Marshall replied. "Nor would I have heard—" He broke off, misery flashing through his expression. "I was too late. I ran faster than the other white flowers did, but I couldn't stop it." "It's good that you didn't try." Juliet straightened up, forcing Marshall to look at her. "It is not worth it. Do you hear me? I cannot take Tyler down if you give him more ammunition by revealing yourself to be alive." But Marshall just stared at the mouth of the alley. For someone who usually could not stop talking, he was eerily silent, his eyes tracking the flashes of violence that came near. "Mars?" Juliet said again. "Yeah," he replied. "Yeah, I know." Juliet bit down on the insides of her cheeks, flinching when the yelling got closer. "I must run back to Scarlet territory and get back up," Juliet said with regret. "No matter how wicked Tyler and his men are, I will not stand by and watch them be outnumbered." She paused, then heaved an exhale. "Go help him, Marshall." Marshall's eyes swiveled back. "I beg your pardon?" "Benedict," Juliet clarified. "Go help Benedict. You look like you're ready to claw off your own skin in helplessness." Marshall was already tying the cloth back around her face. Then he pulled the hood of his outer jacket up. He was unrecognizable, only another part of the rapidly falling night. "Be careful," he said. Another spray of gunfire. "I should be telling you that," Juliet said. "Hurry." Marshall ran off, joining the fray, joining yet another fight on the blood feud that was tearing the city into pieces. And Juliet turned on her heel, retreating to bring more forces to their death. Benedict could hardly see past the sheen of red in his vision. He didn't know if the red was from fury or actual blood splattered along his temple and dripping into his eyes. "Get over here," Roma hissed from some paces away. His cousin was crouching behind a car, gun in hand. Benedict, meanwhile, was only standing behind a street lamp, hardly covering given the thinness of the pole. Up ahead, Scarlets were in a shootout with the rest of the White Flowers, and the odds were not looking good for their side. The Scarlet numbers were only growing, though this was White Flower territory. Someone within Scarlet ranks had to have gathered reinforcements the moment this started. The White Flowers were not so lucky. "What's the use in hiding?" Benedict asked. From where he stood, he fired off a shot. It hit a Scarlet in the leg. "I'm not asking you to hide." Roma, making a frustrated sound, stood suddenly, fired a shot, then ducked back down. "I'm asking you to get over here so we can leave. This is turning into a slaughter." Benedict's vision flashed. The red cleared for blinding white. Night had fallen around them, and their surroundings would have been dark if not for the fire still raging in the safe house, consuming the walls and lives within. "We cannot just leave the fight," Benedict snapped. "You're a damn Montagov," Roma hissed, his words just as sharp. "Know when to concede. That's how we survive." A Montagov. Benedict's stomach roiled as if he had just ingested something rotten. Being a Montagov was exactly what had gotten him here in the first place, right in the middle of a blood feud, bitter as bone, with only his cousin by his side and no one else. "No," Benedict said. "I do not walk away." He charged headfirst into the fight. "Benedict!" Roma roared after him. Roma ran to his side, giving him cover as they both fired, working as fast as they could, but the road had turned to a battleground, soldiers stationed at every strategic place. Though their bullets were running out, gangsters were not afraid to grapple, and before Benedict could call out a warning, there was a Scarlet diving for Roma, knife in hand. Roma cursed, narrowly dodging a heavy blow. When the Scarlet tried again, his cousin's fight became a blur in the dark, and Benedict needed to pay attention to what was coming at him. First a bullet that narrowly missed his ear, then a flying blade, slashing him in the arm only when he dove to the concrete. The ground trembled. The fire had finally eaten up a glass pipe. There was a colossal shrieking sound, and then the upper half of the building burst with an explosion and collapsed in on itself. Benedict staggered to his feet. His mother had died to the feud. Nobody had given him the details because he had been 5 years old, but he had sought them out anyway. He knew that after she was killed, an accidental casualty of a shootout, they had burned her body right in the alleyway until only charred smithereens remained. Maybe this was the way he would join her. The Scarlets would kill him, then throw him right into the raging fire. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Benedict gasped. This time, when the bullet flew at him, he felt it graze his shoulder, sending sparks of pain up and down his arm. Before he could think to raise his weapon again, something hard came down on the back of his head, and everything went dark. Marshall winced, catching Benedict before he fell. Quickly he nudged his friend over his shoulder, hoping that no Scarlet was watching them, and if they were, that the Scarlet would think Marshall was merely one of their own, dealing with a white flower. Roma was somewhere in the chaos too, but he could handle himself. If he couldn't, their men would surely jump in front of him. It was only Benedict who seemed to need foreseeable removal. Marshall felt bad for having to hit him so hard. "You got less heavy," Marshall remarked, even though Benedict was unconscious. It felt less kidnappy when he talked as he ran, as if Benedict were keeping pace beside him rather than being tossed around. "Have you been eating? You're keeping some strange habits, Ben." A sudden shout nearby shut Marshall up. He pressed his lips thin, ducking under the cover of a closed restaurant. When the group of Scarlets passed, Marshall continued moving, muttering a quiet prayer up into the heavens that they were already on the Whiteflower territory. Within minutes, he was in front of a very familiar building complex, nudging the door open with his elbow and entering, arms straining. "Please tell me you haven't started locking up," Marshall whispered. "I'm going to be so mad at you if you only started locking up after I died, and never when I told you before." Their front door opened easily under his palm. With a breath of relief, Marshall stumbled in, taking a moment to sniff out the apartment. It seemed different. Losing an occupant would do that to it, he supposed. The air was dusty, and as was the kitchen counter, like it had not been wiped in weeks. The blinds were crooked, pulled up once some time ago, then abandoned, allowing half light to enter in the day, and only blocking out the half-dark of the night. Marshall finally entered Benedict's room and carefully set him onto his bed. Now that they were safe, the exertion of this kidnapping task caught up at once, and Marshall rested his hands on his knees, breathing hard. He did not move until his heart stopped thudding, tense in fear that the sound was so loud it would stir Benedict awake. But the other boy remained still, his chest rising and falling in the barest of motions. Marshall dropped to a crouch. He watched him, resolute just to watch him, like he had done these past few months. A pair of eyes following Benedict's every move in fear that Benedict would do something foolish. It was strange to be close again when he had gotten used to being a shadow. Strange to be near enough that Marshall could reach out with his fingers. And suddenly his hand was hovering forward, brushing a blonde curl out of Benedict's face. He shouldn't. Benedict could wake up upon disturbance, and the last thing Marshall needed was to break his most important promise to Juliet. "How mighty you are," he whispered quietly. "I am grateful that our roles are not switched, for I would have dove headfirst into the Huangpu should I be left in this world without you." Before the white flowers, Marshall's childhood had been dreary hallways and snatches of fresh air when he managed to wander out. If his mother too grew too occupied with her dressmaking, Marshall was trekking into the fields behind the house, skipping stones on the shallow creeks and scraping moss from the rocks. There was no one else for miles, no neighbors, no kids his age to play with. Only his mother hunched over her sewing machine day after day, her gauze caught out the window, waiting for his father to return. She was dead now. Marshall had found her body, cold and still one morning, tucked in bed as if she were merely frozen in sleep. A soft sigh. Marshall's hands stilled, but Benedict continued breathing evenly, his eyes closed. Abruptly, Marshall stood, tightening his fists in reminder to himself. He was not supposed to be here. A promise was a promise, and Marshall was a man of his word. "I miss you," he whispered, "but I haven't left you. Don't give up on me, Ben." His eyes were burning. Staying here a second longer would undo him, like a curtain being drawn across the stage. Marshall stood up and trailed out from his former apartment, fading back into the darkness of the night.